What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Cal, and today I wanted to take a break from my normal content just to chat a little bit about my reaction to the director's letter for 2025 and beyond from ZeniMax and Matt Fear. I've actually been working on an updated guide for Tales of Tribute for the last 2 weeks, which is far too long to be working on a guide for Tribute, but we got some big news today, and I wanted to share my thoughts and opinions on it. I've already seen that some of this news is a little bit controversial on Reddit, and I'm feeling pretty optimistic about it. But I would love to hear what you guys think of the news and the direction that ESO is headed in 2025. So if you've got strong opinions, please be sure to share them in the comments below. But I kind of wanted to break down the announcement piece by piece and let you guys know what I thought about it. So without further ado, let's jump in. Now, as many of you out there know, I am a member of the ESO Creator Program. However, that doesn't mean that I have to just be positive about ESO all the time. But in the same way that a clickbaity thumbnail isn't good for a YouTube channel, it doesn't do me or anyone any benefit to be overly optimistic about something that is actually not a good thing for the game. I just want to get that out of the way because I feel like everything that we're talking about today is potentially a positive. I'm pretty excited about some of the changes that they are proposing here. I had thought about doing a video talking about how stale sort of the yearly chapters had become, and this is kind of a breath of fresh air for the game. I started playing ESO back with Elsewhere, so I had seen an interview where they were talking about adding the dragon battles, and I was real excited about that, and then I learned more about Cyrodiil, and I thought that was really cool. And so that was what initially drew me to ESO. I've been playing MMOs for, 25 years now? It's been way too long. I mean, dipped my toes into Ultima Online back in the day before they even added Tremel. So, I have a lot of MMO experience, and ESO wasn't even really on my radar just because I wasn't the biggest Elder Scrolls fan. But the way that they implemented dragon fights and the whole story of Elsewhere, I was really excited, checked it out, and obviously now I've been playing for 6 years. So all I've known in ESO is sort of the yearly chapter. That method of content delivery has been sort of the status quo ever since I started. We get a yearly story that includes a chapter, DLC, 4 dungeons. They've mixed it up a little bit, but for me, I was starting to feel like it was not really to the benefit of the long-term health of the game, right? Prior to this announcement, I could have told you that next year's chapter was going to include 6 world bosses, 6 delves, 2 public dungeons, 1 trial, a new in-room, maybe a new large house, and probably a mount that you could unlock by completing the zone story and all of the achievements associated with the new zone. So I didn't like how formulaic that felt, and I had considered making a video to sort of express that opinion. But of course, this announcement beat me to it. So I'm going to go ahead and just scroll right down here to turning the page on chapters. So I do think that their strategy of having a yearly story that ties into the chapter, the Q3 DLC, and a couple of dungeon packs was a good idea, and it worked really well for a couple of years. But like anything, it gets stale after a while. And again, the fact that I could have predicted what was going to be in next year's chapter, maybe not necessarily the zone, but the bits of content and the number of pieces of content, I think was a problem. And the fact that it was so predictable is what made it feel stale, even if it was something new and exciting, right? I really loved Gold Road. I thought the Westfield, or I still think the Westfield, is a really cool zone. I love the aesthetic. I thought some of the delves were really inspired design. The story, I mentioned I thought it was a little mundane and they didn't do everything they could have with it, but at the end of the day, the new trial was pretty fun. Scribing is awesome. I love a lot of the new content, but it didn't feel as dynamic as it could have if they weren't trying to sort of force all of the content into this package that they have for the last 5-6 years. So for me, turning the page on chapters, I see that strictly as a positive. I would love to see them be more dynamic and more responsive, and I would love to see content that is delivered on a schedule that makes sense for the content, rather than trying to pack everything into this one chapter in June and then a Q3 release and so on. So I am incredibly excited to see that we are moving on from the chapters, at least temporarily. It wouldn't surprise me if in the future they return to it. Like trying anything new, this might not be the best thing for the game, and we might see a return to chapters in the future. But for now, getting a year or two away from it, I think is going to be a positive for the game. So, introducing seasons. This was probably the most controversial or concerning bit of the news, but they've already clarified that this is not going to be FOMO content. It's not something that you're going to need to log in and play immediately. It is going to be permanent additions to the game. This is not just like new seasonal or battle pass type content. It's simply that rather than having a chapter in a year-long story, we are going to have slightly smaller seasons of content. And then that content could include new zones, it could include dungeons, it could include trials, I assume. It could include new mechanics, new stories, but whatever makes sense to fit into that season. So rather than trying to check all these boxes that would make sense or justify a $60 expansion, it sounds like they're going to take what they wanted to make, what they're excited to make, what is being demanded by the community, and package it into something that they can deliver on a quarterly or every 6-month basis. So I see smaller bite-sized pieces of content. That's not necessarily what I want to hear. I think if anything, ESO is starved for content, but I think the fact that they can be more responsive is going to be to the benefit of the long-term health of the game. And of course, that is sort of reinforced by this next section here. So a new focus on change and experimentation. Now, I think you could pick apart this part of the announcement and spin it in sort of a negative way. But the reality here is we've got 7 bullets that basically address 7 of the most requested features of ESO. I've actually only recently really gotten into Cyrodiil, despite the fact that it was one of the things that drew me to the game initially. It did take a couple of more recent additions to the rewards in Cyrodiil to actually get me out there. And of course, being a member of a guild that runs raid nights once a week is also helpful. But I've actually had a lot of fun, just running around Cyrodiil since update 44. I did put together a better build, and that helps a lot. But interestingly, I think that this actually kind of addresses 2 of the problems, right? So Cyrodiil performance hasn't been a big issue for me, but the idea that, we could have even bigger battles, I guess they did back in 2014. I wasn't playing ESO back then, but the idea of even bigger battles in Cyrodiil sounds awesome. And then, of course, experimenting with a Cyrodiil campaign where all classes will have PvP-specific skills that replace standard player skills actually, I think, removes a barrier to Cyrodiil PvP. So for me, the biggest frustration is that even though I put together a build that's pretty competent and does pretty well in Cyrodiil, I can get kills, I can complete my daily quests, I still run into players sometimes that are just virtually unkillable. Like you'll just watch 20 plus players wail on them and there's nothing you can do. Or bombers show up and nuke a whole Zerg. And, those aren't necessarily bad things, but they are things that create a barrier to new players. And at the end of the day, this is something that I've been wanting to talk about with regards to Battlegrounds for a while and just PvP and MMOs in general. You have to remove those barriers. You have to design a PvP experience that appeals to more casual players. Otherwise, they bail. And as soon as the casuals bail, then all of a sudden, the next tier up, the not so hardcore, but more than casual PvPers become the sheep, right? And then they bail. And the next thing you know, you've got this cascading effect where nobody is PvPing except for the super hardcore. And that's just, it's not fun and it's not a large enough player base. So I think removing barriers to PvP is important. And if they can make this work, if they can come up with a way to make a Cyrodiil campaign that is fun and low barrier to entry that allows for larger battles, I think that could be really good for the game and really good for Cyrodiil in general. Next up, increasing the difficulty of standard overworld combat. I mean, is that not the number one thing that we've been asking for the last 6 years? One of the selling points of ESO is absolutely the fact that you can start the game and as a level 1 player, basically go anywhere in the world and complete quests and experience whatever content that zone has to offer. And that is a good thing for the game for sure, but it's a dual-edged sword, right? Because it also means that when I go to the Deadlands, a zone that is described as being extremely dangerous and toxic and difficult, I can basically go just AFK my way through the zone and kill anything I come in contact with. So there needs to be some balance there. And I think it's okay. Like you can still have this, play your way, experience the story in the sequence that you want, and still have some zones, some areas that are a little bit more challenging, a little bit more difficult, that create some more satisfying gameplay for more experienced players, to be honestly. Obviously, I don't know how they're going to approach this. There's a lot of ways they could go about increasing the difficulty of standard overworld combat, but I think there needs to be a balance where there are at least some zones that are very newbie friendly, and there are some zones that are more satisfying for a more experienced player. I don't think every zone needs to be accessible to every single player, regardless of experience level and strength of character. I think they can have some zones, much like old school Craglorn, that are more difficult, potentially even require a group or at least a very powerful companion. And I think that that is going to be good for the game. And again, this is the number one request that I have seen over the last 4 or 5 years, right? So this, if they deliver on this, then they will have satisfied, as far as I know, the number one request of the player base. Next up, adding and refining tools to make guild recruitment, interaction, and management easier and more logical. This is actually something that I've talked about in a couple of videos. The fact that in ESO you can be in up to 5 guilds. Guilds are kind of a very important part of the ecosystem. It's the only way that you can list items for sale on the market, and they just haven't done enough with it. I've kind of gone through this with my own personal guild. It was something that I originally created for just me and my friends, and since having this YouTube channel, I've welcomed members of my community, but I've heard that it is difficult for people to find in the guild finder. I've tried different things to get it to show up in certain ways. There are limited options in game for guild communication. You get the message of the day, but that's not really enough. There's no such thing as guild halls, like not really, right? Like I can say there's a guild hall and put a link in the message of the day, but there's no official guild hall. There's no such thing as like guild boards or even like guild crafting requests. Everything has to be managed in Discord. So again, I think this is a huge opportunity for making ESO more unique and making it a better MMO overall, and really bringing these sort of sub communities together in a way that is more meaningful and keeps them in game, right? Like I don't mind going to Discord, but I would much rather be excited to log in and see like what's been going on in the guild while I was offline. Is there any does anyone need anything? Are there any new craft requests? Is anyone setting up an event? Like why is there not a guild calendar in the game? There's just so much potential for guilds, and I really hope that this bullet is not giving me too much hope for the future, because I absolutely want to see guild halls. I want to see a guild message board. I want to see guild craft requests. Give me the like some in-game interface that allows me to run raffles or guild pledge drives or any of that stuff. Like it, it all exists in Discord today, unofficially, and it would be so much easier to manage these things in game, and it would also keep people in game rather than just checking out and checking in on Discord occasionally. Moving on here, concentrating on new and returning user experience. I think this is something that is important for any MMO, especially one that's a veteran in the industry, 10 years on the market. Ultimately, everybody times out at some point, right? Everybody gets tired of a game, wants to try something new. And the reality is that, as they say, they have millions of players who return to the game every year after taking months to years off. And, you've seen it on the forums, you've seen it on Reddit, you've probably seen it in the comment section here. It can be a little bit confusing when people come back. I think that, refining that new player experience and refining the returning player experience are important things to do. And ultimately, they are things that will be or should be really good for the long-term health of the game. So for me, one of the big news here is this line right here. So visually improving base game zones with updated textures and art assets, starting with the starter islands. I think that this is something that is easily discounted, but at the same time, if you have a game where a new player can technically start anywhere, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to start in the latest and greatest zone, right? They might be rolling out to Aridon or one of those other early game zones that hasn't really seen much in the last 10 years, right? Like at this point, it's kind of outdated, right? And it is not up to par with the newer zones and the newer assets. And while I wouldn't want all of development to be concentrated on just making starter zones prettier, I think that there is the potential here to improve the long-term health of the game, right? Because it is important that for those new players, they have a positive experience. All the other bullets here all sound pretty good to me. Sprucing up the game's PC UI, improving other UI systems, not showing new players prologue quests or chapter quests, compass pins. These all make sense, right? For a new player or returning player, I think it's about getting them re-engaged with the game, and you want that to happen as quickly as possible. Otherwise, people bail. And then finally, in the announcement, they call out that they want to continue telling great stories. Now, for me, I have enjoyed the story of The Elder Scrolls Online. I've enjoyed most of the chapter stories, and I look forward to more quest content in the future. For me, it's not the most important thing. I am planning to make a video soon talking about some of my favorite features of ESO, and the story is not one of them. Not because it's a bad story. I've enjoyed it, but for me, the important part of any MMO is character customization, housing, and some of the gameplay systems, like how do you level and how do you gear up and how do you power up your character. So I think it would be good to see the world of Tamriel in the Elder Scrolls Online step forward a little bit, right? It's kind of been locked in this point in time, and we don't necessarily need a new zone to continue these stories, right? They could take us to parts of the world that we visited before, or new areas that we have yet to explore. Overall, I think that this is kind of a surprising announcement. I wasn't expecting this. Like I said, though, I'm not disappointed by anything I'm seeing here. I think these are all potentially positive changes for the game, and I'm excited to see what they are working on for us in 2025 when that announcement comes out in, I think they said March or April. I think it was time to take a break from the year-long stories and the content delivery schedule that we've become accustomed to. I think it will be to the net benefit of ESO in the future if they are able to be more responsive to player requests and deliver content on a schedule that makes sense for that content, rather than trying to time it around a yearly release, right? Of course, there is the potential that that yearly cadence was sort of a forcing mechanism that ensured the regular delivery of new content. So we'll have to wait and see. But there's nothing in this director's letter itself that gives me concern. I'm excited to see what we have in store for us next year, and I hope they are able to deliver some satisfying results on those long requested features, like a more challenging Overland and better performance in Cyrodiil. So that's it. That's all I've got for you guys today. I felt like I needed to respond to the director's letter for 2025 and beyond. I do want to thank you for watching this video. And of course, next week I will be back with the regularly scheduled content. Next week, I've got an updated guide for Tales of Tribute that covers how to dip your toes into the game. And then of course, some of you out there wanted to see the sliders and fashion for that orc character that I put together a couple weeks ago. So I'll be putting together a fashion video for him as well. And then first thing next year, I'm working on a video to share why I love ESO so much and why I will be playing it well into 2025 and hopefully beyond. As always, I'd like to thank my supporters over on Patreon. If you'd like to join the crew, be sure to click the link on screen now. And that is going to do it for me today. So I'm curious to hear what you all think. Are you excited by the announcement for 2025? Disappointed? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you all so much for checking out this video, and I will see you all for the next one. Bye for now, everybody.